is a real pleasure. Have requested some information from Martin, and it's so good. I'm going to read the first paragraph of it. Martin describing some of his work, his activities, and his life. First chapter or first paragraph is Epiphanies. I'm now in my 17th year of poetry book publishing and have done 33 books of verse, one with Bernstein Verlag in Bonn, three with SUNY Press in Albany, and most others with Amazon. This is my new life of post-teaching retoolment. For the previous 35 years, I was a professor of English and comparative literature at Binghamton University in upstate New York. I got into poetry writing by an unusual but logical path. As a scholarly researcher, I fell in love with the idea of privileged moments of literary revelation, often called epiphanies, James Joyce, or reveries, Gaston Bachelard. I began to realize that every major imaginer, whether in poetry, novels, or dramas, had his or her own style of epiphany making. The same visual components, elemental focus, earth, water, air, fire, geometric figures, circle, curve, square, and motion pattern, perpendicular, rapid, slow, explosive, would keep recurring even though endlessly varied. My method of analysis, with examples ranging from Wordsworth to Tolstoy to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, is made clear for everyone to use in my popular Patterns of Epiphany. I began to see that a great imaginer contributes something irreplaceable to the total human treasury of literary revelation moments.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, the joys of poetic meter. Meter is nothing but regular, recurrent word rhythm. That's a very simple concept. In fact, every child understands it. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Yes? Lala, 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 lala. And the concept there of verse meter in English is nicely illustrated because it consists of a contrast between heavy syllables or strong syllables, which are the beats, and the other syllables, which are lighter or weaker, and they come in between the beats. That's all the rocket science I have to teach today. Honestly, everything follows from that. There are also 3-syllable meters, but we'll get to that. That's more complicated. You might have to be in the 4th grade or something to grasp onto that. So we'll postpone that till the second hour. I've decided to start with the simpler things, and not do the Greek, the Hebrew, and the Roman, but postpone those and talk about what's happening to meter today. All right, so you've got beats, and a very popular is the beat la la. Hello. Okay, you hear that the low is heavier than the he, right? And that doesn't mean it's louder. That does, because it works just as well if you whisper. It doesn't mean that the pitch is higher. I'm citing, when I've tried to explain this to people before, and these are some of the confusions that they get into. Not pitch, not volume, but heaviness, emphasis. Redfish to bluefish. Okay. So if you have la la, that's called an iamb. Shakespeare liked that. He wrote usually 5 of them in a line, and that's where you may have even heard the phrase Iambic Pentameter. He wrote millions of them. You should be able to hear them in every play that he wrote that you go to. I usually can't. And I think that's because something has happened to beats. Let's forget about that, because I don't believe in negativities. I want to forge ahead with what's positive. That's the iamb, and the opposite of that, anybody happen to know? Instead of weak, strong, suppose we have strong, weak. What's that? That's called a trochee. So if you say hello, Mary, you hear that Mary, the emphasis is on syllable 1, and the re, it's met. Re. Syllable 2 is a lot softer. So if you say hello, Mary, you have uttered an iamb followed by a trochee. Now, I thought you might like to know something about how I got interested in this sort of thing. I think it might have started, it sort of built into me when my mother told me that when I was a toddler, I used to sit on the couch and throw myself against the back of the couch and then move forward and throw myself again against the back of the couch and do this for maybe half an hour or an hour. This was a way of creating rhythm, right? And it got me started with being crazy about rhythm. She had no comments on it. She simply observed it, and she told me in later years. So even now, I don't know if I actually remember doing this, but the idea is so attractive when I even imagine it that I probably really did it. I wrote a poem about that. It's called Toddler, and I put it in this book called 100 Artisanal Tonal Poems. Slimmed down 14ers, 4-beat lines and tight, sweet harmonies. Instead of Shakespeare's 5 beats per line, I use 4. And that speeds up the tempo, and it creates also, what should we say, a more slender line and a speeded up tempo and a tighter harmony because the rhymes come sooner. It has lots of advantages. So these are, this is in 4 beats. I woke, reliving toddler time, back banged against the sofa, hope of pounding power found, ere rhyme might higher haul up hawser rope, for ocean view unknown to grope, if rhythm wind with this would chime, breathe deep with vigor, mind let climb the joying, jostling meter slope. I'm imagining myself here with meter being introduced to rhythm. And since the ocean is the model for rhythm with its tides, constant tides, ebb and flow and don't ever stop, I thought of myself as a sailor on a ship climbing up one of the sail ropes. I proud refelt the paradigm that tide-like helps the ocean cope with force uncurbed that spurs sublime might lacking goal of motion mope. My feet on mattress beating prime the poet's politropos trope. Politropos means versatile. It's the most common describer of Odysseus. So this is, in other words, the beginning of my poetical odyssey, and the predictor of everything else in my life is banging my back against the back of the sofa, and it survives in my habit of beating rhythm with my foot on the mattress when I wake up in the morning. Isn't that an interesting? I'm an odd sort of guy. I ought to be studied by a scientist of some kind. That's just what I do. It's the sense of rhythm wanting an outlet. All right. Let's see what else I have on this theme. Oh, probably my earliest poem that I learned was taught to me by my mother. I lived until age 7 in New York City before my father got his first teaching job in Bloomington, Indiana. We moved there. So I lived in New York City, and my mother thought that was a rather dangerous place to be. And so she gave me a little poem to recite, and she said, you can always say this to anybody if you get lost, and that person will help you home. I wrote the poem here. My name is Martin Bidney. I live in New York City. Nice, huh? And 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. It doesn't have the usual sort of rhyme, but it has assonantal rhyme, E, right? Only the vowels rhyme, the consonants don't. But there are traditions of poetry, like Spanish folk verse, where they use assonantal rhymes exclusively. All right. While I, sipping my coffee, let reverie stray, here's the jingle I heard. Let it play. Since I lived in New York from my birth to age 6, our attention my mother would fix on the words I have typed with astonishment now. I was amazed that it came back to me from age 6. 'Twould a safety recital allow. Should you ever get lost, she explained, you can say the short poem I've taught you today. And a stranger's enabled, wherever you roam, to accompany you to our home. Let's recite it together now, shall we? Okay? So we did. That was perfect. Hooray! What's important this morning to me as I dream is a likely prophetical dream. gleam by the smooth gliding meter, the pleasing near rhyme. She's predicting my lyrical time. The lyrical time for me began when I started writing musical poetry, like the kind I just read to you. That didn't happen until I retired at age 61. Before that, I got a hint that I wanted to be a poet, but I didn't know if I had enough to say. And first of all, I didn't know if I had enough craft to say it with. So I apprenticed myself for 2 years to the Russian writer Gumilyov, and I translated 8 of his collections from Russian. I majored in Russian, and I have a master's in it, so I'm very familiar. And I had one of his poems by heart that I recited when I got carpal tunnel and was told I shouldn't play the violin for 6 weeks until it was cured. So I went to the typewriter and proceeded to write word music instead. And the remembered poem in Russian came into my mind, and I translated it. And then I gave it to Maria Gillen, who teaches poetry here at SUNY Binghamton, the next day. And she said, write me a dozen and I'll print them. Isn't that interesting? That happened basically when I was 59, and then I started writing original poetry at 61, and most of it was written in emails. I discovered it was more fun to write emails in verse than in prose. So I think maybe that's it on backgrounds. You don't need to hear anything more about my backgrounds with meter, I guess, at this point, do you? So we can move on, and let's try one of the more successful metrists, William Shakespeare, and I would like to show you not only how meter works and what fun it is, but how I learn my meters. I have invented a new genre of literature, and if that isn't the case, please tell me if you've got counter evidence, because I don't want to tell any what should we say? I don't want to misspeak, I guess is the way they put it. I don't want to tell any lies or perpetrate inaccuracies. But I appear to have invented this genre of literature because I haven't seen any other examples except the ones that I've written, and that is the verse interview. You read a book of poems. It doesn't even have to be poems, and you reply in poetry. So every time Shakespeare writes a sonnet, do you happen to remember how many you wrote? 154 is the total number. He wrote 154, so I wrote 154 replies. And the point of doing that is just like a pupil goes to the Louvre to study painting. So I went to Shakespeare to study meter because I like his beat. I like his Iambic Pentameter, his 5 iambs per line. It's very melodious and pleasant. And so I decided, what better way to learn how to write Shakespeare's beautiful meter than by answering him 154 times? So I did that in Shakespearean sonnet form, of course, using the rhyme scheme that he used every time. And here's the result. It's a book called Shakespeare. Can you see that? It says Shakespeare, P-A-I-R. Not because I don't know how to spell the name Shakespeare, but in order to prove that there are two of us. And that's why our portraits are side by side. We even have the same hairdo and we're wearing a shirt of the same style. Actually, we were classmates at Stratford High. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm a time traveler. And we used to compose sonnets and exchange them because we'd get our Latin homework done pretty early, way before the rest of the boys. And so the teacher ignored this. Okay, let's take a sample, and I'd just like to share with you a couple of interviews because it really shows you in a very concrete and dramatic way what fun to have with poetic meter. This is sonnet 143. Lo, as a careful housewife runs to catch one of her feathered creatures broke away, sets down her babe, and makes all swift dispatch in pursuit of the thing she would have stay, whilst her neglected child holds her in chase, cries to catch her whose busy care is bent, to follow that which flies before her face, not prizing her poor infant's discontent. So runst thou, he says to his lady love, after that which flies from thee, whilst I, thy babe, chase thee afar behind. But if thou catch thy hope, turn back to me, and play the mother's part. Kiss me, be kind. So will I pray that thou mayst have thy will. Will, get it? Will, Shakespeare. If thou turn back, and my loud crying still. Isn't that an amazing poem by Shakespeare? We tend to think of him as a towering figure in literary history, but here he's nothing but a character in a story. The sonnets are like a TV series with two different love triangles and constantly re-erupting, never-soluble sexual problems. It's a very vivid narration, but it is fiction. It's imagined. And Shakespeare, when he speaks, is always speaking as the fictional character, the narrator. He does call himself Will. There are even sonnets where he goes out of his way to make jokes about the name Will. So he is at once hiding and giving it away, but the fact is it's a fictive voice. He put it into a work of imagination. So this is a fictive Shakespeare. So this Shakespeare doesn't have to maintain any reputations. He never knew what reputation he was going to get later anyway. Instead, you see, he compares himself to a little kid, little baby, who's left on the grass or in a cradle while the mother is chasing some chickens that's threatening to escape. Chicken chasing, ignoring the kid. And so Shakespeare says to his lady friend, all right, whenever you've caught whatever it is you're after, would you mind turning around and looking at me for a while? Poor thing. Here's my reply. A Freudian would levitate, for here, portrayed with entertaining levity, our Will's annoyed and wants a mother near. She rounds up fowls. He's howling, look at me! As verb, the still means he'll be quieted the moment she relaxes and returns. But read as adverb, still means even fed with full attention, yet the infant yearns and cries and can't be rightly satisfied. A drive insatiable, the baby's will, the need for nourishment too long denied, not quite can ever surrogate fulfill. If child on parent pattern all desire, to after image cries will rise yet higher. Yes, your parent is your first love object, and if you stick with that idea of love objects being like parents, I'm afraid you're in for some trouble. Did you like the reply? I hope so. I'm hoping you think you like the idea of verse interview, because I don't at this point plan to stop writing them. I've just written another one where I interview Pushkin, Russia's greatest poet. I interview him in English, so don't worry. I translate all of his poems and then I reply to them. I often translate my mentors. I'd like to read you do one more dialogue because these are fun, and the point of view we're taking is the Joys of Poetic Meter. And particularly toward the end of this book, Shakespeare gets quite whimsical and amusing. And it also gets a little odd in his meter. He's been faithful to the 5-beat line almost throughout, but here in Sonnet 145, he is using 4-beat lines. And I like them. They move fast, as I pointed out already, and so they zip up the tempo, and they somehow make you feel lighter. They are good for a playful mood. And this is a kind of joke poem. Those lips that love's own hand did make breathed forth the sound that said, I hate, to me that languished for her sake. But when she saw my woeful state, Straight in her heart did mercy come, chiding that tongue that ever sweet was used in giving gentle doom, gentle judgment, and taught it thus anew to greet. I hate, she altered, with an end that followed it, as gentle day doth follow night, who, like a fiend from heaven to hell, is flown away. I hate, from hate away she threw, and saved my life, saying, not you. In other words, she must have been speaking rather slowly, and she said something like, I hate, not you. How am I going to reply to that? I'm going to try to explain the joke with an alternate version that's a little more modern sounding. How sprightly and how swift and how delightful, spirit-lifting she, compassionating lady, row and lowering done, recovery. The word row is not used in America much. It's very common in England. It means a quarrel. The four-beat scheme portrayed the speed, 1/5 increased in brief, whereby a word became a healing deed, wherein a seed of light would lie, a sunray, rapid, quickening, a dozen lines, and comforts had. I hear the gentle lady sing, I hate, just hate, to make you sad. I hope it's been a good idea to introduce the Shakespeare who isn't usually quoted. You won't hear either of those poems cited very often. But I wanted to show you, if you go through the 100 poems, 154 rather, you are going to experience an extraordinary variety of moods. Now, turning from the 5, I'd like to give you just a brief peek at what we're going to be doing in the next hour. Yeah, and that is some things from the ancient world. If you take the Iambic Pentameter and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, could you not rock the chair, please? It's distracting. I can't do anything but look at it. Where are we? Where are we? Yes, there was an ancient Roman who varied the Iambic Pentameter in a very tiny way, but it's a radical change. Instead of and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, he wrote and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 5. Is that a minor change? Well, the sound is going to be very different. And why? Because that extra syllable has to be in the same place in every line of every poem written in this new verse form, which we call the hendecasyllabic, just meaning 11 syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And 1 and la la, la la, 2 iambs. La la la, la la la, well, as we'll learn next time, is called an anapest. And then la 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 la, la 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 la. And the Roman writer who made a career out of this, out of hendecasyllabics, was Catullus. I don't know if you've even heard of Catullus, have you? If you haven't, won't worry about it. He's vastly underrated and ignored. He isn't much read in schools. I think he got himself into trouble with posterity because he wrote a few poems which are regarded as obscene. And so people get the idea this is a poet to stay away from and not to recommend to younger folk. But I'm not too keen on censoring poetry. And I would like to promote the reading of Catullus. He's very up to date and sometimes highly amusing. So let's get a sample of him. Listen, Lesbia, let us live in loving. Rumor spread by the stern old gossip codgers, let's appraise at the worth of not 1 penny. Sun may set and again awake in dawning. We, however, if once our light is guttered, spend unmoved an eternal night in quiet. Give me kisses 1,000, then 100, then 1,000 again, another 100. one more 1,000, and then a final 100. After all of the thousands we have counted, shake the abacus well, erase the number, also keeping the evil man from envy, who's unable to tally up the kisses. If other guys can't, if they don't have a counting machine, they'll have nothing to be envious of because they won't know how many kisses we had. That's an ancient, he could be in a New York bar, couldn't he? I don't see anything particularly ancient Roman about this. It was fun to do the reply because, of course, I'm interviewing Catullus. This is in my book called Bliss in Triple Rhythm, a toolbox for poets, where I introduce 9 different kinds of nearly extinct stanza forms. Here's my reply. Yo, Catullus, I love that rebel spirit. 13 lines, may it prove your luck is winning. I'm a little bit funny about that because I was taught when I was a boy by some people that 13 is an unlucky number. But then I was also brought up Jewish, and bar mitzvah is a lucky year. So what I prefer to think of 13 as a lucky, not an unlucky number. Horace told you to seize the moment. Well then, best keep busy, of action be the master. Chronos with a CH as in chronology. Time is with Chronos with a god, equivalent to Saturn. God defeated, badly, wrongly confused, they vastly differ. True, the father of Jove is old, bent over, leaning closer to earth the more he's weakened. Time, though, sprightly as Hermes at the seashore, when a lyre from a shell he made and played it, sings to love with the spindrift, ever mindful. Spry and spraying and spree are lives of mortals, climbing high as the tide in vital triumph. I hope that's been a helpful introduction to Catullus. You can see how he doesn't appeal to shall we say, stolid people with his thousands of kisses, but at the same time, there isn't anything dangerous to read. Here's a favorite of mine. It begins, dining well is a guarantee, Fabellus. Dining well is a guarantee, Fabellus, when you come in the next few days, God willing. If you also will bring a nice big dinner, not forgetting a girlfriend who's attractive, nor the wine and the wit providing laughter. Charmer, keeping in mind these kindly favors, you're assured of a grand old time. The wallet, sad to say, of your friend is lined with cobwebs. In return for your gift, you'll savor friendship, maybe something more elegant and pleasant. I will give you an oil which to my girlfriend all the Cupids and Venuses had granted. Smelling this, you'll be tempted to request that into nothing but nose the gods may turn you. This is my reply, it's a short one. Here the irony master, God be laureled, made a jest of a cordial invitation. Should you come and provide an entertainment, dinner, company, jokes, and fine imbibing, I'll repay you for splendid contributions. You'll a fragrance enjoy, for love essential. What an invitation. Well, I love Catullus so much that I made my responses rather short, so you could hear more of him and less of me. But after a while, I decided, well, why don't I do a little Catullan writing on my own? So here's something in the hendecasyllabic 11-syllable meter by me. Okay, it's nice and short. It's about shopping at Wegmans and meeting a beautiful girl there or a woman. That's all that happens in the poem. I thought that's enough to write about. If you're me, that's enough to write about. Done with shopping and heading for the exit, thinking only of waiting for the taxi, which would come, I was told, in 15 minutes, I'd been startled by one who, coming toward me, made me suddenly readjust my focus. She my twitch of the head had surely noticed, quick result of the altered eye direction. Broadly smiling, she happily acknowledged what my body and mind at once accomplished, paying tribute instinctive to the vision. Dark brown, flowing, the long hair, wavy, lustered, face quite delicate featured, eyes of thank you. She was feeling, I know, the same deep gladness beauty grants to the viewer and possessor, double present of coupled smiles delighted. I feel like I've been reading those at rather rapid tempos because they seem to me so lively, like somebody getting excited in a conversation, particularly if they're in that bar that I mentioned. They may have had a few also. I'm going to take this occasion for a deep breath before I begin to our next poet, the next type of meter, whatever it is. Would you like to comment on anything you've heard so far, or? It's not obligatory. I can take my deep breaths regardless.
I would like to comment and just say I loved the poem about meeting the woman in Wegmans, because almost every time my husband comes home from Wegmans, he tells me about a beautiful woman he saw there. And but can you say again the name of the 11-syllable line?
Sure. It's if you want, do you want to write it down or memorize it or what?
Yes, I want to write it down.
Okay, if you got your pencil. Hen is the first syllable, H-E-N. It's Greek for one. Deca, D-E-C-A, is the next unit. That means 10, 1 and 10. And then syllabic, hen decasyllabic.
Thank you.
I have no idea. I do have an idea why it is that names for rhythm units like trochee and iamb and hendecasyllabic are Greek. This is because the Greeks took a vivid interest in them.
Uh-huh.
We're still speaking Greek today. Any more comments? Yes. By the way, I have to tell you that when I grew up, I had the impression that I was not outstandingly handsome by any kind of conventional standard. And so I have throughout my life been spent a certain amount of time imagining how people gifted with extraordinary physical beauty feel about it. Imagine going into a room and knowing that you have made everybody instantly happier. What an effect that could have on our personality. That ends my thoughts on the subject. Something more?
I was wondering, how do you spell Catullus? C-A-T-A-L-U-S?
No, Catullus is the way I'd rather.
Okay, sorry.
Catullus, that's all right. C-A-T-U-L-L-U-S. In Russian, in Roman, in Latin, Catullus. Catullus is what we'd say in English.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing that down. I hope you'll enjoy it. I noticed somebody has just come out with a big book of Catullus, but I didn't dare to open it because I'm afraid it might not keep the meters. Anything else?
Did you already mention how you came about to write the interviews? What
interviews.
inspired you to do that?
Oh, that's a very interesting story. The first interview book that I embarked on was a result of a very odd experience that I've told people about it often, but I've never heard anyone else describe anything like it. I was asked because by somebody who knew I liked to translate verse, if I would translate Goethe's the greatest collection that Goethe wrote in his old age. Goethe, the author of Faust and Germany's greatest poet, Goethe. I think we have a street named after him in Binghamton, although they usually call it Goethe Street. That's all right. We're entitled to our language too. Goethe wrote a book in his later years, in his 60s, called West-East Divan. Divan is a Persian word meaning collection. West-East means I like the idea of masquerading as a medieval Persian pub poet. At the same time, I'm not going to stop being myself. So in this book, you can expect poems where I take on, and I will even give myself a Persian name, Hatem. I'm going to call myself Hatem, and I'm going to write love poems. The fictional lady, not so fictional, I'm going to give the name Zuleika, which sounds pretty nicely in tune with Islamic culture. And I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to call it East-West Collection. And Schubert, Schumann, Hugo Wolf, any of your favorite composers have probably set, hundreds of composers have set his lovely melodies to music. And I was asked if I would translate this book into English. And I agreed. It's 240 poems. And what happened to me one night is that somehow I felt it's as if I couldn't even breathe. Something had was obstructing my free breathing and intake of air. And I suddenly realized there was too much of this guy in my head. I had to write something. So I wrote a reply. And then I decided I would do that with every one of his poems. So for his 240 poems, I must have written at least 280. And the reason I couldn't stop myself with some poems. Sometimes I'd write 2 replies, or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And that's the way it is published today. It's like he wrote an East-West collection. Well, I will do that too. Except mine are in the back. They are called commentary, but they're correlated with the ones in the front by number. So if you're reading poem number 133, just leaf through a few pages and you see what I have to say about 133. And that's my first interview book.
What's the name of that one?
By Goethe, 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 and it's called West East. I hyphenated West East Divan, Divan. Nowadays, a divan is a sofa, isn't it? But back then, it was the people that sat on the sofa. And it meant an assemblage, a group of people or of objects. You see how words float around and take on additional meanings in different contexts. So he called his book West East Divan, and most people think, oh, gee, is that some kind of furniture or what is it? But I kept it because he chose it. Thank you for asking. Oh, I'm so glad when people ask these questions. It means they want to do some kind of a follow-up. No matter how brief, a follow-up is a compliment. Not so much to me, but to the people whom I cite here. And any more? Well, let's move on then. Here's a very interesting poet mentor that I chose, because whoever wrote this is not usually recognized as a poet at all, because the book is not traditionally called poetry. I refer to the Quran. If you think of it as written by Muhammad, you would have to say Muhammad is a super genius, I think. But Muhammad wouldn't like that. He always insisted that he didn't write a word of it. It came direct from God, and I'm not going to fight about that. I loved the poems, though, and my way of reading them was the fortune teller method. I had a Quran. I had never read it. In that respect, I take after my father. Throughout my childhood, I saw the Quran in the same translation that I had on his bookshelf, and I never saw him open it either. We say Judeo-Christian religion. Have you heard that? Or Judeo-Christian tradition? Have you ever heard anybody say Judeo-Christo-Islamic tradition? Well, that came next, and the Quran is full of passages where Allah says, I gave the Hebrews the Torah, I gave the Christians the gospel, and I am giving you this holy Quran. It's remarkable. So listen to this. Here, this is a good example of what I did with the Quran. In my fortune telling method. There is a fancier Greek word for that, as there are for most plain things in English. Instead of fortune teller, they call it bibliomancy, which means book magic. A lot of people do this, don't they? Actually, horoscope is something like that. Or in the Middle Ages, they used Virgil, whom they thought of as a sort of crypto-Christian. Or some people do this with the Bible, opening up a... Have you heard of that, haven't you? Maybe you've tried doing it yourself. Open up the Bible to a random passage and see what you get. Maybe that's your best guide for the day. So one day I opened up the Quran to chapter 5, Surah 5, as it was called The Table Spread. And here's one verse, not even the whole verse. It's a long verse. It's verse number 110. Allah said, O Jesus, son of Mary, remember my favor unto thee and unto thy mother, how I strengthened thee with the Holy Spirit, so that thou spakest unto mankind in the cradle as in maturity. Maybe you don't remember Jesus speaking in the cradle, but in the Quran, he says a long prayer, and it is perfectly composed, full of majesty and grandeur. Just a little kid, in a cradle. And how I taught that the scripture and wisdom and the Torah and gospel. Sorry, let's do that again. And how I taught thee the scripture and wisdom, Jesus says, and the Torah and gospel, and how thou didst shape of clay, as it were the likeness of a bird, by my permission, and didst blow upon it, and it was a bird by my permission, and thou didst heal him who was born blind, and the leper by my permission, and how thou didst raise the dead by my permission. Interesting, isn't it? Did you ever hear a story about Jesus making a bird out of clay, and he looks at it and it flies away? Did you? Every now and then I meet somebody who has heard it and hasn't heard it in the Quran. It survives in one of the Gospels that was rejected. There are lots and lots of those. So it can be found in a Christian text too. It was floating around in the Middle East. Muhammad, the prophet, had all kinds of friends who were Jews and all kinds of friends who were Christians. And he had lots and lots of interviews. He quotes the stories. The Quran is full of Bible stories, Christian stories and Jewish stories. What else? Where else was he going to get his stories? He was going to talk about God. What was there to say about God? He was introducing God. He wasn't introducing a God that everybody knew about, although there were rumors. Let's have the poem that I wrote about that. I decided I would write, keeping many of the same phrases, but in not fours, not fives, but in a 6-beat line, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. I've used this quite widely since then. Yes, Allah's scripture, wisdom, Torah, gospel taught to Jesus, Holy Spirit aiding, in him wrought the power to teach when he yet in the cradle lay, the willing pilgrim who embodied doctrine sought. By God's permission, Jesus made a bird of clay, and breathing on it, sent it flying on its way. He was allowed to raise the dead, make see the blind, and heal the leper, glory deed of storied sway. Muhammad accepts all of those miracles as valid and puts them into the Quran. The scripture, wisdom, Torah, gospel, words that Muhammad has Allah using. Humankind from Jesus learned, Muhammad's followers will find, so God would underline, in telling of it here, 3 Abrahamic legacies are intertwined. The Jesus bird through heaven flying will appear to them who resurrected feel each day and year. Light spirit being granted never can be caught or caged, proclaims the heart unaging, free of fear. I have read so much Quran by my fortune-telling method that I often quote it. It comes to mind automatically. It is when I said, the Jesus bird through heaven flying will appear to them who resurrected feel each day and year. I'm quoting a Quran verse where God says, man is resurrected every morning as from dead to a new life. I like that thought a lot. That's one of the best scripture verses I ever read. In fact, the scripture that I use is a translation by Marmaduke Pickthall, which he made 100 years ago. Marmaduke Pickthall was a a talented writer. He was a professional writer, and most translators are not professional writers. Therefore, the Marmaduke Pickthall Quran is a work of literature in itself, and what could perhaps never have been predicted is that it would be such an extraordinarily good one. George have his hand up?
Can you tell me what the passage from the Quran was that you read?
Sure. Chapter 5, Surah 5, S-U-R-A. The cantos or chapters are called surahs. Surah 5, verse 110.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm just delighted at these requests for references. Nothing could make me happier. Now, I want to say something more and something really crucial about Pickthall as a translator of the Quran. He had an amazing sense of rhythm. Listen to a passage from Pickthall's Quran. This is how he renders Surah 26, verses 83 through 89. They're short verses. The chapter is called The Poets. My Lord. Oh, and by the way, this is said in an earlier passage to be a prayer uttered by Abraham, the founder of Islam, as he is of Judaism and of Christianity. My Lord, vouchsafe me wisdom and unite me to the righteous, and give unto me a good report in later generations, and place me among the inheritors of the garden of delight, and forgive my father. Lo, he is of those who err. And abuse me not on the day when they are raised, the day when wealth and sons will avail not any man, save him who bringeth unto Allah a whole heart. This is a remarkable passage by any possible standard, because he is forgiving his father. Have you ever heard the legend? It's not in the Bible, that when Abraham came home one day, his father was furious because Abraham had smashed all the idols. You heard this? It's a vision. It's a story told widely in Judaism, because it occurs in the Midrash, or collection of legendary tales, which are studied in Jewish schools. But it never got into the Bible, but it's in the Quran. But the Quran adds something that the Jewish version of the story does not have. What happens is the father, Terach, interrogates Abraham and says, "Who did this?" And Abraham says, "That big guy over there, he did it," because Abraham left one idol untouched, and it was the biggest in the room. "That big guy over there, he did it." And the father said, "Now you know perfectly well they can't do things like that." And Abraham said, "Precisely my point." Smart guy, huh? Clever, witty. Father didn't think so. Father thought it was intolerable to talk like that to parents. And so he attempted to burn his son alive. It's not in the Jewish version, but it's in the Quran version. And here we have Abraham forgiving his father for that. Well, you can't help but be impressed, right? Or you may be puzzled, you can be baffled, you may be taken aback. I'm not going to try to guess what you might be, but I will simply say that for myself, I was quite startled. But I was startled not only by that, but also by the form in which it was expressed. I only had to tweak just a couple of words here and there, very slight changes, and here's what I got. Tell me what you think. My Lord, vouchsafe me wisdom, to the righteous minds unite me, and give to me a good report in later generations, the heritage to merit of the garden of delight. My father pardon, lo, he is, alas, of those who err. Abuse me not upon the fateful day when they are raised, the day when wealth and sons and power avail not any man, save him who bringeth unto God an undivided heart. It's only slightly more regular, isn't it? You recognize everything I said before. And yet the new version is just by a few tiny changes, has cleared up the metric scheme, which is, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. Yes? And it proves, I hope, that one of the joys of metric writing is you can write not only 4s and 5s and 6s, but 7s too. Now, how am I going to make this into an interview poem? The whole first stanza was written by Muhammad, or by God, not by me, maybe by Pickthall in part. What I did was I took the ending words of the lines, which are, unite me, generations, delight, raised man, heart. And I decided to use them as rhyme words for the next 2 stanzas. Invite me, nations, sight, prefer, amazed, can, start. Incite me, oblations, night, a whir, praised, span, art. So what looked like it had no rhymes is actually the beginning of a scheme in which everything rhymes. I call it delayed gratification rhyming, and I don't know if I invented that too. It's extremely rare. But why not do it? So let me read you the rest of the poem, which is the 2/3 of it that I wrote. So prayed our father Abraham, to grateful thought invite me, the outstretched arms of pardon that he spread before the nations, that veils let fall away before the newly wakened sight. Let flourish every seedling that the reaper will prefer. The ears of wheat on field be found, the gleaner eyes amazed, to see what more will yet remain, who've gathered all they can. For every day is harvest meant, the ending or the start. To vie with others in the race, fine work to do, incite me, the prayers made by Abraham, to give the loved oblations, with gratitude for stir of day and quietness of night, for sun warmth in expanded wave, and for the waves a whir, for psalming in the summer and the blizzard winter praised, for dew and rain a mercy, for the body mind to span, the matter spirit living in the servant hymn of art. That was easy to write. Wasn't anything there that I'd have any trouble saying myself. And we have had things in 4 beats, in 5, in 6, and in 7. Listen to this. This is from the Quran. Surah 33, verses 45 and 6. O Prophet, we have sent thee as a witness and a bringer of good tidings and a warner, and as a summoner unto Allah by his permission, and as a lamp that giveth light. Now, if you change only unto Allah and say to God, that's not a change in meaning, then here's what you get. We have sent thee as a witness and a bringer of good tidings and a warner, and a summoner to God by his permission, and a lamp that giveth light. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. It's uncommon to write in 10-beat lines, but nobody stops you. So here we go. And that's the complete Quran passage, just only 2 lines, and I have a lot to say about it. Only 2 stanzas to say, but, they're 10 beats each. We have sent thee as a witness and a bringer of good tidings and a warner, and a summoner to God by his permission, and a lamp that giveth light. Let our human creature learn, for truth enduring, be a yearner, not a scorner. For the finder of the love that is our life is ever comely in our sight. May the lonely soul arise from her prostration, never more to be a mourner. Let the Lord, who is the daybreak, raise the yearners of the world from ancient night. When we resurrect the dawn, we reawake the flame-begotten red beginning. Reascending sun, a miracle appearing as upon the day of birth. May a heart with light be flooded to turn aside the straying spirit whim from sinning. Let the warming glory overwhelm a tale of desolation and of dearth. For the race to do good work, to gain forgiveness from the height, is worth the winning. Sons of heaven, hear your God belauding, hymn resung by children of the earth. Well, I hope you liked that. It shows you what the fortune-telling method can do. On the very next page, there's another thing that set me off. Very short verse. This is number 86. no, sorry, it's poem 86, Surah 33, the clans, and the verse is verse 63. What I have done is I took the four parts of the sentence, short sentence too, and I just wrote what I have to say about each of them. And I did so in short lines. Little more metric originality here than in some, but I don't care what the precise degree is. The idea is to respond in some interesting and living way. Here's the Quran. Men ask you of the hour. Say, the knowledge of it is with Allah only. What can convey the knowledge unto thee? It may be that the hour is nigh. That could be interpreted like Horace's maxim in one of his odes where he says, Carpe diem, seize the moment, watch the hour. Men ask you of the hour. If it be true that God alone can say the time the wheat field sown, will witness give that it has grown to such a height the load when shown may far by myriad sheaves be known. Let souls await their power. This knowledge who'll convey? The minute, it may be, is nigh, when we assign from out the sky with heightened heartbeat will espy, and him the art of one on high, who sent the rain and sun that I may praise a waking day. The hour, indeed, is here. For seers who at daybreak pray, receiving, feeling every ray that bears our heavy care away, our labor will itself repay, accepting of the heaven's sway that to prophetic ear proclaims the moment now, when men and women loudly sing to laud the hid Creator King, and him their tribute grateful bring, of heartfelt holy harvesting, and overswept by spirit wing, bend down and prostrate bow. Okay, any comments? You're welcome to interject your feelings or thoughts or addendums of any sort at any time. You noticed all the rhymes there. There were quite a lot of them. And I hope you got something of a sense that we could have another presentation of equal length called The Joys of Rhyming. I remember when I was in college, there was a joke where a student showed up at the Modern Language Association national meeting and went to poetry reading, a recitation, and perplexed, he said to his neighbor, where are the rhymes? That's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that the current trend is not in favor of rhymings, and it certainly isn't a trend in favor. There is no such trend as one in favor of acrobatic style, multiple virtuoso rhyming. But it has often been cultivated by people in the past. And some of the greatest poets of the modern age have done it. Rilke is a regular acrobat in rhyme, and English versions ignore this. Mine don't. I have a fat book of him. I interviewed his first two big books, New Poems Part 1 and New Poems Part 2. Now, this is very interesting. I'll stop those. I'll conclude my offerings from this book with this poem because it relates to a very one of the most important verses in any scripture to me. This is Surah 33, called The Clans, and it is verse 72. And God says, "Lo, we offered the trust unto the heavens and the earth and the hills, but they shrank from hearing it and were afraid of it. And man assumed it. Lo, he hath proved a tyrant and a fool." I could sum that up in two words: climate crisis. A big point about Quranic ethics is be a steward. It's called viceroy in the old language that Marmaduke Pickthall prefers. And then there's a little episode illustrative of some of the problems of environment when not enough account is taken by rulers of what they're doing to what's around them. This is from chapter 34, verses 34:12 and 34:14. And unto Solomon we gave, says God, the wind whereof the morning course was a month's journey, and the evening course a month's journey. And we caused the fount of copper to gush forth for him, and we gave him certain of the jinn, the fiery spirits, who worked, genie is what they're often called, worked before him by permission of his Lord. And when we decreed death for him, nothing showed his death to them, save a creeping creature of the earth, which gnawed away his staff. And when he fell, the jinn saw clearly how, if they had known the unseen, they would not have continued in despised toil. So, in other words, King Solomon, according to the Quran story, was a big-time developer. And he misused his powers to such an extent that he exploited his workers, so that if they had known his death was coming so much earlier than they had expected, they would have rejoiced and stopped working. And I have a comment on that. Lo, we had offered trust to heavens, earth, and hills, but they had shrunk from hearing it. They were afraid, and man, assuming it, proved tyrant and a fool. When Solomon we gave the wind in strength arrayed, the blast at morn or eve a month-long journey made, outdistancing the very jinn with speed that thrills, did then the king expose to lasting ridicule what the might we granted by their labors heavy laid. The creeping creature that had gnawed the royal staff evoked from spirits overtasked a languid laugh. They wished that they had known from work that they despised, they'd very soon be freed, but they were quite surprised. Until man faithfully a steward role fulfills, he cannot thrive or prosper. Brief will be his rule. I gave a lecture in Germany on Christians and Jews in the Quran, and I talked a lot about that poem and those passages. I talked about the centrality to Islamic thought and scripture of the concept of the steward, and one really can't say enough about that. And I said this to the Germans in their own language. I wrote my lecture in German, and I delivered it in cathedrals in Berlin and in Mainz. Now, sometimes the Quran, let us go on to some other topic now. We have sampled that rather well. Now I'd like to point out that sometimes I take a writer who writes in prose, and I turn his prose writings, I versify them, I turn them into poems. And I did that repeatedly in this book called God the All-Imaginer with Ibn Arabi, IBN-ARABI, Ibn Arabi. He was the greatest commentator, expositor of Sufi teaching in the Middle Ages. Sufis are Islamic mystics, or they are mystics whose background historically started out in Islam, but it has a lot of teachings from Hinduism in it, and it wants to be universal and to go beyond all religions. Now, Ibn Arabi tells, in fact, he takes this quite far. He believes that a religion is comparable to a glass or a cup, something you pour a liquid into, and the liquid is the water of spirit. So you can hold the water of spirit in various kinds of religions or glasses, or narratives or stories or mythologies or scriptures, and they are glasses, but they are not the water of spirit. Now, what is this cup composed of? It is composed by people of what they understand about themselves and about the world. So whenever you read a scripture verse, you are reading the cup that was given to you, but you pour it into, so to speak, the cup that is yourself, your own. You are yourself the container made out of what you have learned so far about yourself and the world, and that's what that will enable you to take in the water of spirit. The interesting thing about the water of spirit is it's easier to drink with a container. Containers are recommended, but certain reservations about the limitations of each container are in the metaphor as well. Interesting, isn't it? That's not only is that a central teaching of Ibn Arabi, but it is a central illustration of his technique. He often takes an object or a concept, something very concrete and simple, and makes a symbol out of it. And the result is, I'd call it a parable. I think the parable of the cup is a very good example of a really successful parable. Jesus made a wonderful effect with his parables. They're very good. I make the point in my preface that the parables of Ibn Arabi challenge comparison with those of Jesus or of certain Hasidic teachers who like to have stories to illustrate their main points. Here's the poem that I made out of this teaching. Ibn Arabi wrote some poetry too, but mostly he communicates in prose. But I keep stopping when I read his prose. I think, oh, that's a perfect parable. I don't want to go on. Let me write it up. Junaid said, water will the cup's own color take. The essence of the real cannot be named or known. It has to be made manifest. I gladly drink what my preparedness had made me thirsty for. My character and nature and the use I make of what has happened, what I'm given, how I've grown, will shape the cup that holds what I suppose I think, yet water into endless vessel kinds he'll pour. Manat, Allat, and Al-Uzza. These are goddesses, very popular in Islam, who are condemned in the Quran. But Ibn Arabi says that these females three, who each had been considered once a deity, were thus a triple apparition of the real. People, that was the level of God that people were equipped to receive at the time. In fact, Ibn Arabi even goes so far as to say that Moses did not have to get so upset over the golden calf. That was all the people who worshipped it were equipped to receive at the time. When the ages progressed, it would be revealed that a golden calf was really quite from many points of view, an inadequate object of worship. Just wait for time and don't be speedy with punishment. That's the kind of a teacher we have here. I really like him for good company. Manat, Allat, and Al-Uzza, the females three, who each had been considered once a deity, were thus the triple apparition of the real. The face of God is everywhere, but he has made all things in measure, in the hues of names arrayed. From colored cup we drink what we in spirit feel. Okay, is that clear that the religions, as well as your own personal state of mind when you're in a state of a condition of receptivity, are cups, and they give, like a glass, a cup will give coloring as well. The glass will give form. Containers give color and form to the water of spirit. I like that idea so much that in a great number of my poems, so-called original poems, I work it in. Poets, cannot afford. They haven't got the time. Life isn't long enough to acknowledge all the sources in every poem. So you won't find very many poets that write with a scad of footnotes. However, I did invent another kind of interview poem where I'll write a verse of my own, and then on a facing page, I'll interview myself about it. In other words, I'll comment on it as if I were an interviewer in prose, in a blog. So first you have a poem, and then you have my blog about it. And I call them blogatels. That's a word I invented. I'm glad you're laughing because Elizabeth, because you've probably heard the word bagatelles. A bagatelle, anybody know what it is? You don't hear it every day, but it is an English word borrowed from French.
Isn't it a sort of a musical dance?
Yeah, it's a musical piece. It could be a dance. I like your idea of the dance because it means something light. If you look in a dictionary, it says a trifle, a light music. So I call my blogs blogatels because I try to make them musical. I write them carefully. I craft my prose as carefully as I craft my poetry. Sometimes the prose blogatel takes twice as long to write as the poem did, but I'm hoping that they help people out. I don't have that here, but let's see, in the very book that I started with today, remember I was telling about how I used to bang my back against the couch, and then I said, I can't be sure if I remember this or only reimagine it. That's from Baudelaire, called Thoughts on Toddler. So the book is called 100 Artisanal Tonal Poems, slimmed down, 14ers, 4 beat lines, and tight sweetheart. Oh, I didn't even bother to mention Baudelaire. In some other books, I put it on the title page. I have now published 33 books of verse, and I sometimes forget what I did in one book or in another. Now, what should we have next? Yeah, let's have, oh, this is interesting. Right on the facing page, another parable. Of course, he has dozens of them. And I translated all the best that I could find. Once again, my method is fortune telling. So here too, I'm really interviewing, but I don't quote his precise words. Instead, I offer simply the reply. This is called Ibn Arabi Tells of the Knot. Beliefs or knots can tie you up or down. It's interesting, isn't it? In English, we can say tie you up and tie you down. They're both bad. And yet, the intricacy of a knot we may admire. The beauty of its making, laud. Oh, I know a guy who's very proud of all the Boy Scout knots. He posts the techniques on Facebook to this day that he learned in his Boy Scout years of how to make these knots. And the diagrams are extraordinarily elaborate. With me, I can't even see straight. I couldn't master the easiest one on the list. The beauty of its making, laud. The Sufi tries each one, for all are of the real. Our thoughts are wide, and may all things include, save hidden being. Let us tie the knots and learn their making. 'Twill require undoing each before we try the next. The eyes all beauties cannot view together. We'll abide with each belief, assume it, feel it, live it, and the range of emblems value that with bounteous hand the real, the hidden being glad will grant, but still remain unbound, unlimited by any. We can nothing but belief that is conditioned see. The tying and unbinding many lives would fill. Isn't that interesting? When you want to secure a package for mailing, you tie it with knots. There's no doubt that knots are useful. On the other hand, knots can tie you up, they can tie you down, they can be impossible to undo. Knots are twofold, and the same thing goes for beliefs. Beliefs can just be awful impairments and hindrances, but they can also spur you on to something if you happen to believe it's a good idea to love your neighbor, as I do. I'm hoping that it helps me out as it has helped others. So there's not a whole lot of difference then, is there, between the concept? It's a question of the degree of emphasis or of angle. The parable of the cup and the parable of the knot amount to basically or imply the same kind of caution. Take a look at each belief, take a look at each religion or mythology or Bible story or anything, and consider its adequacy as a container for the water of spirit, or if you like, if it's a knot, then for the package of spirit that you are neatly tying together. Any comments on that?
I really like that. I really like the parable of the cup. I really think that's quite deep.
I think it's one of the best thoughts I ever read. I can't get over it. And I'm glad that this book called God the All-Imaginer is one of my better selling books. God is often called omnipotent, right? All-powerful or omniscient, meaning all-knowing or almighty. I have never heard him called, so once again, I invented the word omnifingent, F-I-N-G-E-N-T. That's from the same root as the word fiction. It means the all-imaginer. And for Ibn Arabi, we live in a world that is an imagining, and we are ourselves we are imagined by God, and we imagine more things. We imagine God because God imagined us. It's all about imagining. You have, maybe you can see at this point just how exciting this is for a poet. I mean, he's the ideal theologian for a poet. He has done me no end of good. Does anyone have a question? No? Or additional comment on this? Those are two of my favorite parables. Oh, I should mention something else that might interest you, because we're talking about having a good time in our explorations of poetic meter. One of the best times that I had was to read Ibn Arabi's interviews with the saints in heaven. He went there and he interviewed all 27 of them on the various planetary spheres, and he brought back accounts of what they had to say. And I picked out the things that I thought were the best, and I wrote poems about all of them, sonnets just like these. And then I asked my friend, who's a professional calligrapher, if he would please write each of the sages' names in the most beautiful calligraphic handwriting. And there are 27 of these calligraphies in my book. It's astonishing that Amazon doesn't charge any extra. It's black on white, doesn't cost them money.
Martin, excuse me, can you take a question?
Oh, please, I love it.
Question.
It's more a comment than a question. I just love your invented words.
Who's talking?
That was George.
George, thank you.
Yeah, I love your invented words. And then the calligraphy is, I do, some amateur calligraphy myself, but that was amazing. Can you show us a couple more?
Oh, well, delighted. I'm so happy. Here's another one. Has no relation to the other.
Wow.
Different style, right?
Yeah.
What is that? How about this?
Very nice.
Isn't that something? 27. And the book costs almost nothing.
Wow. Beautiful.
They're names. Those are names. They're artworks, aren't they?
Yeah.
They look like works of abstract art. But when I show them to an Islamic speaking or an Arabic speaking cab driver, and we have lots of them from Kurdistan in Binghamton, New York, they can read it.
What was the title again of the book?
The book is called God the All-Imaginer. The subtitle is Wisdom of Sufi Master Ibn Arabi in 99 Modern Sonnets, with 27 full-page calligraphies by Shahid Alam. He's my friend, he's a German citizen. He's lived in Germany for over 40 years, but he left Pakistan to get an education in a West European country of a sort that he did not think he would ever be able to manage to get in Pakistan. And he described for me the ceremony, which seems to be prescribed somewhere in Islamic law. When he left, he was encouraged to leave for that valid reason by his parents, and they folded a Quran over his head and he walked under it, and then his mother forgave him for her milk. That is one of the oddest things I ever heard in my life, but what it means is, you don't owe me anything. I don't want you to feel any guilt or responsibility for all the years of care that I devoted to you. So
Beautiful.
She forgave him for her milk. Honestly, the things I learn in this world. All right. Anything more, George?
No, thank you very much for all of that, though.
You're most welcome. Yes, and why do I mention that? It's because Shahid Alam does the calligraphies in this entire book, and the cover is also done by him. It shows Arabic saying floating in the air and mirrored below, the colors of air and earth, and then this is an oasis that is depicted. This painting also was made into the book cover by his permission. Shahid Alam is apparently when he came to Germany, which is where he decided to take his graduate education, because they wouldn't admit him in America unless he paid the fees, whereas in Germany, if you're prepared to learn German, which wasn't a problem for him, you could get in for free, and he got in for free. No tuition for his entire graduate career. Maybe we should rethink our policies in America. And it's not that we don't attract a lot of people. We do. Not everybody is prepared to learn German, and most people know a lot more English when they're preparing graduate years than they do of German. But the German didn't bother him, and he writes me poems now in German and sometimes in English, because he was a star student in English also. And sometimes he writes them in Urdu and translates them for me. Okay, Shahid Alam is not the real name. He's not his real name. They couldn't pronounce his real name. So he invented one for himself. It means witness of the world. Okay, now the last book from which I would like to sample poems for you today is called 6-Beat Sonnet Treats. What I wanted to do was to show people that, yes, we love Shakespeare, and he did write mostly in 5s. And most poets who write sonnets have followed him for the last few hundred years, writing in 5s. But you don't have to write in 5s. The Germans, the Poles, Mickiewicz, for example, I translate a whole book of his called Sonety Krymskie, Crimean Sonnets from the Polish. He wrote them in 6s, and I preserved the 6s. 6-beat lines. And in France, that has been a prize-winning poetic vehicle, to write sonnets in 6-beat lines. It's all over French literature. And where is it in English literature? Well, you're going to have to buy better specs than I have. I don't find 6-beat line sonnets written in English. And I think they should be, because I have one criterion of what should be done. Does it give joy? And the answer is, as I hoped to show in great abundance, yes, because in this book, 6-Beat Sonnet Treats, I wrote 400 of them, just to show you, once you start, you won't want to stop. I'd like to show you where I come from. I'd like to tell you, how I got to where I am, because some people think I'm in an odd place. My favorite poem that I learned in German or in French class when I was in high school, I took 2 years of French, then I took another one in college, was a poem by Baudelaire. Have you ever heard of Baudelaire? He's one of the best known of French poets, because in the 19th century, he combined sonnet forms and traditional poetic, poetic tradition generally, with a new consciousness of what life was really like in Paris. And he covers very realistically, like the most nitty-gritty novelist, a lot of the terrible things to be seen there in elegant sonnet lines. Nobody saw this. Nothing like this was ever done before. And he wrote a book about it called Flowers of Evil, which was duly censored. And nowadays, of course, it's read by every Frenchwoman. Well, my favorite Baudelaire sonnet was called Beauty, La Beauté. It was so beautiful. I'm going to even, if you don't mind, since we're talking about things that give us pleasure, I'm going to read it to you in French. Je suis belle, that means beauty. This is a portrait of beauty, and she speaks. It's her soliloquy. Je suis belle, ô mortel, comme un rêve de pierre, et mon sang chacun s'est meurtri tour à tour, et fait pour inspirer au poète un amour éternel et muet, ainsi que la matière. Je trône dans l'azur comme un sphinx incompris. J'unis un cœur de neige à la blancheur des cygnes. Je hais le mouvement qui déplace les lignes, et jamais je ne pleure, et jamais je ne ris. Les poètes, devant mes grandes attitudes, que j'ai l'air d'emprunter aux plus fiers monuments, consumeront leurs jours en d'austères études, car j'ai pour fasciner ces dociles amants de purs miroirs qui font toutes choses plus belles mes yeux. mes larges yeux aux clartés éternelles. Now, I'm sure you, not positive, but I'm guessing you want to know what I was saying, or rather what I was singing. You could hear how musical it is. If French doesn't convince you what word music is, then I don't know what language to try. Here it is in my English version. O mortals, I am lovely as a dream of stone. My breast, where each one hurt may struggle in his turn, was made to stimulate in each a love eternal, muter than the merest matter, cold alone. In azure throned, I am a riddling sphinx. I keep my heart snow cold, my skin more white than any swan. Mobility, displacing lines, I frown upon. And never do I laugh, and never do I weep. Before my noble pose, which I may well appear to borrow from a proud memorial of the brave, each day the poet will eke out a work austere. Malleable admirers, look, for you I have pure mirrors that will make things beautiful and bright. My eyes widening, eternally alight. I'm glad you like that. That is such a strange poem that even after you've heard it in English, I wonder if it's much clearer than it was in French. Really, it is very, very strange. This is supposed to be beauty talking, and she's something like a great mother, isn't she? But she's both the good and the evil mother. She never laughs, and she never cries. She's like made of marble. She praises stone. She says she hates mobility because it displaces lines. But what's supposed to redeem her in the eyes of what she hopes will be her willing pupil who will sign up for a long-term course of not only study but duty is that she has miraculous eyes. They're eternal. And they'll never stop looking at you with their widest possible expansiveness. And what does that mean? It's your mother looking at you, as far as I can tell. Everybody likes to have someone else looking at them. And one good reason is its acknowledgement. And another reason, from a poet's point of view, fascinating also, is that the interest is proved by the fact that you're mirrored in the eye. Isn't that true? Your image will appear on the pupil if you're lucky enough to be close enough. Now, if you're looking at yourself in your mother's eye for the rest of your life, you're probably going to, be a very satisfied baby. I don't know how else to put it. You'll never grow up. That's not the way to get anything done on your own, especially since she's forbidden you to move. Well, so that's quite interesting. On the one hand, it's so beautiful, but from another point of view, this man has to see a psychologist. Baudelaire was a highly troubled person. It doesn't make any difference. In art, if your task is to create character, you create character. I have a comment on this, of course. I couldn't stop. I love interviews. So this time I've interviewed Baudelaire, and I followed my customary practice of first translating my interviewee and then replying to him. Okay, here we go. This is called "And Never Do I Laugh and Never Do I Weep." A dream of stone, self-portrait in a single phrase. Her lovers on her breast are hurt as if 'twere sharp. The poet glorifies with Alexandrine harp. Alexandrine is another name for the 6-beat line. A sphinx unmoved by men, who unmoving stays. A, spelled A-Y-E, means eternal, eternally. What's wrong with motion? 'Twould disrupt the magic trance, whereby she traps admirers with her widened eyes, where they their image view, untainted, pure and wise, infern maternal. I invented that word. Infern maternal, that tyrannical romance. She naturally cannot laugh and never cries, for either deed would countervail the raptured gaze that child identity will guarantee. I might say, and petrify, will guarantee. She plays a riddling game. Thus will a flatterer be wise, bright glassing, that is mirroring, of an ego weak with lack of praise, matern eternal light that blinded will denies. So she's the ultimate jailkeeper. I don't recommend worshiping women made out of stone. Well, anyway, you've just heard another fun interview. This time I interviewed France's most prestigious poet, perhaps of the first half of the 19th century. Well, I've been talking about Baudelaire as a writer-up of experiences that nobody else would talk about, somebody dying of hunger on a city street or something of that kind. Not that he is particularly compassionate. He's just simply a naturalistic novelist. Yes, I'd like to share now with you an experience that happened to me, okay, on a Binghamton city street. I went to see a play. And afterward, I went to the Greyhound bus station. And the reason is I wanted to take a cab home. I wanted to take a cab home because I can't drive, because I don't know if you noticed it, but I only look out of one eye at a time. I have what's called divergent focus. Have you ever heard of that? It means you only look out of one eye at a time and you do not see any depth. And that doesn't make you a great driver. So I don't drive. It's interesting that I lead such a normal life with such a peculiarity. It doesn't seem to bother me. It bothers me in one respect, chiefly, and perhaps only. I've never hit a baseball in my life and never will. All right, let's have a poem called Greyhound. The play was over. Tracy Letts's Killer Joe. Do you ever go, by the way, to the No Theater? It's wonderful. Oh, are they marvelous? The play was over. Tracy Letts's Killer Joe. I thanked the actors all, then down the street I'd go, where near the Greyhound station, taxis often wait. But somehow, freezing night, it seemed. Too cold, too late. A kindly cop I met who called a cab for me, a man whom she'd be taking to a shelter. She, so helpful to us all, when hearing my address, asked, maybe drop him off? I can't, but nonetheless, I heard their further talk. So, do they come to you quite often? Thoughts of suicide? My days are through. I say, God, take my life, outside or in a bed. Next morning, I am really mad because not dead. The cab drew near. I cried, quite helpless, heavy, sad. I wish you every happiness that can be had. That took no imagining at all. That happened to me. But I don't want to end with that. I don't know how much more time I have. Was it about maybe 6 minutes?
Right, 6
Right?
to 8.
6 minutes. Okay, let's try something a little jollier. I'm calling this Shake Zoom because LinkedIn sponsored on Shakespeare's birthday a reading of his entire sonnets. It took hours and hours because you were entitled to comment on what you thought about the poem that you had read, and a different poet had different readers volunteered for different poems, and they had to muster up 154 readers. It was quite an epic scale television event, and it was done by Zoom, and I was invited. I was one of the last to sign up, so I got one of the last in the book. But as I hope I showed you today, they're quite good, the ones in the end of the book. Zoom. A Shakespeare birthday greeting, April 23rd. Pay homage to the bard, ye lovers of the word. A LinkedIn-sponsored marathon will Zoom, you see, and sonnet 151 is saved for me. I'll add the quick reply that I in Shakespeare penned, commemorating thus the genius of my friend. The poem's twinned, you'll hear, indeed this very night. 10:30 is the time. Oh, joy, the eyes grow bright. The time when Will and I, devoted schoolmates were, we often spent in doing what we'd most prefer, exchanging sonnets. Did the Latin teacher know what we were writing? Prudently, no sign he'd show. Oh, paradise, our happy days at Stratford High, so long ago, and yet in memory, so nigh. Well, some people will claim that I'm not a modest man to have these fantasies. Maybe one more? You think I have time for one more? Yes? This is called preparation. I was preparing to give a yes for that very reading. 5 minutes at the most my Shakespeare reading will be taking, and the time won't come for quite a while. So why does my adrenaline keep adding still more tension? Need I fear I'll fail in point of style? How silly! Thrice before in public I could read the likable selections with a nice effect. How little cause to worry that I might neglect some tiny thing and then repent. Oh, fie, indeed, talking as if I were a Shakespeare character here. The cure for jangled nerves at once occurred to me. The art of versing was done for pleasure. Can't you see that what we're after here is nothing more than fun? Ah, now I can relax, breathe free, my trouble's done. Enjoy yourself, my friend, and pleasure you'll convey. 'Twas Schiller, An die Freude, who exalted play. An die Freude is German for Ode to Joy, and Schiller is the poet who wrote it. And then Beethoven set it to music in his Ninth Symphony. Well, Schiller not only wrote the Ode to Joy, but he wrote an essay on art. And he said that the noblest thing about art is that it's a form of play. And play is the noblest of human activities because it liberates everything. Play is ultimate human freedom. And in fact, in German, that works out rather well because Freude is German for joy. And what is the German for freedom? Freiheit. And in fact, he called his poem not An die Freude, but originally An die Freiheit. Not Ode to Joy, but Ode to Freedom. This, however, was the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and Napoleon was invading various parts of what was then not even Germany, but a bunch of splintered states. And the political security of both writer and would-be hearers was, shall we say, doubtful at the very best. And so he censored himself, and he called it Ode to Joy. But it could just as well be an ode to freedom. I see no difference in the content. The title is equally to be applied to both. Don't you think? Joy and freedom. Freedom is joy. And what is one mode of the exercise of freedom is to choose whatever rhythm you want for your poems. Because if you're like me and hit the mattress with some sort of beat in the morning before you even get out of bed and have any coffee, then you will find that the free expression of your nature will require not only daily mindfulness, but let's say daily beatfulness. And shall I conclude on that note?
Thank you so much. And Martin, most of my experience with poetry is reading it. It's so delightful to be hearing it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Particularly from you.
Thank you, thank you. Honestly, reading is reading aloud. Reading quietly should be reading aloud. In other words, you should be hearing the voice in your inner ear. Can you do that? Good. Then you're a poetry reader.
Yeah.
You have nothing to learn from me.
That was wonderful, Martin. Thank you so much. We look forward to next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So do I.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.